Well, how's it feel to be world champions? They were almost with you there that time, Fred. He tried at the 9 o'clock to get the Let's Go Royals chant going, and suddenly he was just standing by himself, just clapping. Well, we tried. So welcome to our final week of Fall Faith, 2015. You know, it seems to me that I remember about 6 weeks ago, maybe 6.5 weeks ago, because we had that Fall Faith, week 0.5, where I stood, in fact, I think I stood right about here, and I said, this series is going to be a transformational series. And I said, you know, I know we tell you that every year, but this year we mean it. And I can tell from some of the stories that I've heard you share with me that this has been a transformational series. That this has been a series that has given you an opportunity to really go deeper and to look at what's going on inside of you. To look at those things that we've been conditioned to believe about ourselves, including that belief that we're separate from the divine power. That we're separate from that thing that we here at Unity Church of Overland Park call the Christ. It's that thing that our co-founder Charles Fillmore defined as the perfect presence of God. And so we've been exploring how we can engage in these spiritual practices, and we can let these spiritual practices really transform our life. We talked about how through a practice of awareness and practices of acceptance and forgiveness and benevolence and compassionate communication, how through engaging with those practices, it allows us to come to this understanding that we are divine. And because we're divine, we don't just have to let life happen to us. We don't just have to react to what happens to us, but we truly get to create how it is that we experience the world around us. In a sense, we get to become the author of our own life. And we get to do that because of what we know is true. It's what the first unity principle teaches us. The first unity principle teaches us that God is all good. And then the second principle teaches us that an aspect of that goodness of God is individualized in us. And as I said, we call it the Christ. And so the more we're able to connect with that Christ nature, the more we start to realize that it's there to help guide us. It's there to help us create the experience that we want to have. The more we realize that there's something there that's a power that's greater than what we thought we were, that's calling us to become something greater than what we thought we ever could become. You know, it occurred to me as I was preparing for this, and I admit I did have to struggle a little bit as I was reading through the chapter. I'm the author of my own life, and okay, how am I going to explain this and share this principle, because I know the author is sitting right there. and I know, and I'm like, oh, I hope I get it right, and I don't hear, Brandon? But what I realized was that, you know, a lot of times we like to say God is within us, and that's true, God is within us. But what I realized is that it goes beyond that. That this idea of just saying that God is within me still implies that there's this separate being. That there's this separate being that exists within me, and I'm separate from that. What I realized the truth is that there is absolutely no separation between myself and God. And so it's not just that God is within me. God is manifesting itself as me. God is manifesting itself as me. Yet life tells us something different. Each and every one of us has experiences of life that reinforce that idea that, no, God is separate from you. And that's where this transformational spiritual practice comes into play. Because it's through engaging with these practices that we begin to chip away at those things that taught us something different. We begin to chip away at those experiences that taught us that we have to react in a certain way to protect ourselves. We begin to chip away at those experiences that taught us that life is something that happens to us. I know that I'm not the only one that has ever had that, oh, woe is me, will life ever work out for me experience? I know I'm not the only one that's had that. But as we do our work with awareness, as we do our work with acceptance and forgiveness, and we do what we can to open our heart in compassion and benevolence to our fellow travelers, we realize that we're a part of this greater story. We're a part of a story that's the expression of God. So we have our own individualized story that we're living. But as a whole, we're all part of this greater story. The story of the expanding consciousness. The story of this drive to realizing our full oneness of God. And it's a story that we've heard allegories about time and time again, whether it's about a garden and the fall of humanity and the beginning of the evolution of consciousness there, or stories about second comings and kingdoms that we should be striving to attain. Each one of those is an allegory for the story of our own expanding consciousness. And as we continue to work with these transformational practices, we begin to realize that we're more than just a character in that story. That we get to tap into that Christ nature that we are. And we get to author that story. Now, our ability to do that relies on our ability to engage with these practices. And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to invite Reverend Robert Brumet to join me on the platform. For those of you that don't know, come on up, Robert. Beyond being the author of our Fall Faith book, Robert also has a connection to Unity Church of Overland Park. Robert served as one of our senior ministers in the past, and was actually, you were the senior minister when we moved into the building right down the street, is what you were telling me. So, in addition to inspiring us today, you've been part of the long history and lineage of this community. So thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
If you'd like to, let's see. You know, I think as students, we would always have this experience. Robert taught a lot of our self-awareness classes, and so we would have these experiences where we would be both grateful to you and at the same time a little annoyed at what we were being put through. But at the end of the day, it was such a rewarding experience that I think I'd just like to ask, what was it that inspired you to take that work that you'd been doing with students and to put it into living originally and share it with a larger community?
Yeah, that's really a great question. It's hard to say exactly what it was, but there was something urging me. I wrote Birthing a Greater Reality, and I thought, well, that's it for a while. And yet something kept niggling at me, something kept pushing me, and I sort of made this agreement with Spirit that if you keep after me, then I'll start writing again. Well, it wouldn't leave me alone. So I sat down, and every day these ideas began to come through. And it was almost as if the book wrote itself. And it was interesting too, Brandon, because I could feel this sense of urgency, like it's like get it done, don't dally on it. And then I realized that just before this book was published, that Unity made the announcement they're not going to publish any more books. So this book was the last book that Unity has published. And so Spirit was working through me, and fortunately I was responsive to that, and here we are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for listening to Spirit.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
As I was looking at this week's theme, that I am the author of my own life, and you discuss in the book how it's almost as if we can envision this future version of ourselves, this Christ being, this Omega being that's writing our autobiography, and we're living that out. How does that relate to this idea that life is predestined, and that we're not just on this track living out what something down the line has created for us, but that we have some ability of choice and free will? How do those two ideas reconcile themselves?
Well, I think that we have within us a seed, a pattern, if you will, and that it's predestined that eventually we will unfold that pattern. But exactly how and when and what that will look like in the world of form, I think is largely up to us. So it's like if we plant an acorn seed, or an acorn, that's predestined to become an oak tree. But it's not predestined as to what that oak tree will look like, how big it will be, and how fast it'll grow, and so forth. So the expression of the Christ is up to us. But what is predestined is that the Christ will express through us, sometimes in spite of ourselves, And when we resist, why, that's when what we call problems arise. And it's really an opportunity to listen and say, what is it that I'm not expressing fully of my divine nature?
I like that you mentioned that idea of resistance, because I think so often we get trapped in this idea, oh, I'm not doing it right, or I've run into difficulties and problems. But in many ways, those can be our greatest teacher. Would you just speak briefly about how resistance and seeing that resistance and moving through it can be really a good thing?
Absolutely, yeah. The practice number 6, everything is my teacher. If I'm willing to see that the world out there, or at least see through the lens that the world out there is here to teach me, it's a mirror, and it's there to mirror parts of myself that I'm not able to see. And I think that's one reason why we come as souls into the world of form, is so that we can create this world that reflects back to us things we need to see and things we need to cultivate within ourselves, that we wouldn't do it if it wasn't for the problems in our life. And most people I've talked to after the fact will say, thank God for that crisis, for that problem. Whether it was my cancer or my addiction or whatever it was, they can really see it as a gift. But when we're in the midst of it, it's very difficult to do that. So that's where the faith and the knowing that God is expressing in every way in our life. And our job is to listen to that. And so the resistance is kind of the friction. It's the place where Spirit is pushing us to go beyond our conditioned self. And our conditioned self is saying no because it's afraid.
Wonderful. Well, I could certainly sit here and ask you questions for a very long time, but
fun.
I'd like to open it up to you. So Reverend Jan will have a microphone, Cherie will have a microphone, and there'll be an usher in the balcony. We didn't forget about those of you in the balcony. We just can't see you real well up there. But if you have a question, just raise your hand and one of the mic runners will get to you.
What is the greatest barrier to living in the present?
What is the greatest barrier to living in the present?
I would say it's fear. And not just fear, but when we believe our fears, I think that's what takes us out of the present moment. Because fear then puts us into living from a strategy rather than from living authentically and originally. And typically that strategy then is one that we developed long ago when we were children as a way to survive. And so out of fear, we may hide. We may hide our light. We may become aggressive. We may become seductive. We may become codependent. But all of that is coming out of fear. And that fear then puts us in the past and keeps us preoccupied with the future. So living in the present moment means being willing to look at our fears and to experience the fear in the present moment and to see the unreality of it. Because there's nothing ever to fear in this moment. In this very moment, there's never anything to fear. Fear is always about the future, which isn't real. It's never here, you see. So living in the present moment is the best antidote to fear. And fear is what keeps us from living in the present moment. Does that help? Is that clear enough? Yeah. Good, okay. Cool.
So what else? There's one back in the middle. Reverend Jan was at the parade last week, so she spent a good 3 hours standing solid, so we'll let her move.
Thank you for coming today. My name is Pam Scard, and I've really enjoyed participating in this. I'm a new member here in Overland Park, and I really enjoy the education and the self-development. I really enjoyed being a part of a group to read your book. I have a statement, and then I wanted you to offer a reflection. And the statement is based on my personal experience and spiritual awakening. Self-awareness is a very important practice, and what you lay out is brilliant in your book. I want to thank you for that. It's a true gift. It's a true spiritual gift. But my experience has been personally that self-awareness is a very important part of the journey, but there's still the perceiver and the perceived. There's a reflection, and it seems to me in the awakening process that ultimately it comes down to realize that you're just awareness itself, which we would say is God. And from my personal experience, that gift to us through grace. But I would like to hear what you have to say of how that fits in with your experience as a theologian and what you've written in your book and the practice of awakening. Thank you.
Thank you. I heard most of that, but not all of it. So Jan, if you could...
That with awareness, we are both the perceiver and the perceived, and coming to the point that we are awareness itself.
Yes.
And your comments on that as a theologian and as the author of the book.
Okay. Yeah, initially, when we're aware of seeing, hearing, sensing, thinking, so forth. There seems to be someone that's aware of something. And that's could be called the observer or the witness that's being aware of that which is being seen or experienced. Occasionally we have these experiences where the witnessed, the seer and the seen become one. It's probably the best example is in sports, you know, when we're in the zone, or acting, or dancing, or in art, or singing, or whatever, where we become one with the experience itself. We don't get lost in it because we're fully aware of what we're doing. But there isn't someone that's aware of something. There is just the awareness itself living life out. And so that often happens. And that's sometimes called the zone, sometimes called being in the flow. It's uniting and collapsing the seer and the seen so that there isn't this duality of the two of them. But as we start out with self-awareness, typically what we see, what we're aware of, is the fact that there's someone that's aware and there's something there, there's an object, there's a subject and an object. But ultimately, the subject and the object itself are one. Did that answer, did that address your question?
Yeah, that's been my experience. My experience is that was delivered to me through grace. Is there any other way?
Okay,
So,
say again?
It was delivered through grace. Is there any other way? That was her experience.
I think it does. I think that's the only way that it comes. It's often been said that enlightenment is an accident, but spiritual practice makes us accident-prone. So I think the more we do this practice, the more grace-prone we become. Yes, yes.
so what else?
I'm especially interested in your chapter on forgiveness. Could you speak a little bit more how you should not condemn a person as a bad person who has done something against you? For example, say they embezzled your money. How do you get past that?
Okay.
In forgiveness, how do you get past a bad person? Say they did something like embezzle money. How do you move past that?
By feeling all of your feelings, feeling the hurt, feeling the injustice, feeling whatever it is, the helplessness you feel, feeling the anger, feeling the rage, just processing all of those feelings and allow those feelings to be cleared. And then at the end, we can say, what happened was wrong, but it happened, and the person that did it was wrong when they did it, but they're not necessarily a horrible person. We can separate the person from what he or she did. But we can only do that once we become clear of our own pain and our own sense of outrage and injustice. Because otherwise we're going to project that onto that individual. And anytime we're blaming somebody and seeing them as a bad person, that's a projection of some disowned feeling within ourselves.
I know that's always been kind of my impulse is to want to jump right to, well, I forgive them, and skipping over that step of really taking the time to feel what it is that I'm forgiving them for.
Exactly, yeah.
All right.
Robert, you're piggybacking right into my question, just from like the other way around. Would you speak to the importance or your understanding of the importance of staying heart connected to live an original life?
Yes, because did you want to repeat that, Sheree, just in case everybody
The
can hear?
importance to staying heart connected to living an original life.
In our culture, we tend to live through the mind. And we have a split between the mind and the heart. And, as Kelly was singing this morning about making mistakes and about just letting it happen, the heart is unpredictable. in the heart will take us places that the mind may not want to go. So to live from the heart can be frightening, and yet the reward is beyond words, you say. To love, to open our hearts, to forgive is frightening, because the mind wants to control, but the heart wants to live, wants to express itself. So that's where life really is living from the heart. The mind has a place. The mind can create the maps, but it's the heart that lives our life. The mind can give an explanation, but it's the heart that really makes life worthwhile. Yeah.
As I've started working on these practices of yours, which are wonderful, I'm finding that, first of all, you'd say something about a month for each practice. That's a lie. It's going to take forever. But I'm finding that fear, that ego, pops in all the time.
Yeah.
How do you handle the ego, the fear, when it does? Or what would you suggest?
How do you handle the ego and fear when it pops in?
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest?
Who is it, you'd ask the question, who is it that wants to handle the ego? Who is it that wants to handle the ego?
I don't handle it so much as...
But who's the I that wants to handle the ego? Probably the ego itself.
Yeah, it's taking over, right?
Exactly. So we can't handle the ego because it's sort of like the ego wants to control everything. Even the way even its own funeral, the ego wants to preside and give the eulogy over its own funeral. So what we do is we simply observe the ego without buying into its story. That's really the crux of the whole thing, is to the ego will do whatever it does, but we don't have to believe it. We don't have to take it so seriously. So we can feel our anger, our fear, and all of this stuff, the stories that the ego creates of how I should be and how you should be and how the world should be. And just notice that and say, thank you for sharing. And just be aware. Yeah, don't buy it. So it's not suppressing anything. It's letting it express itself. But a little bit like a young child that's upset. You know, if the child comes to us, we don't want to repress his feelings or her feelings. We let them express their feelings, but we don't buy into their story of how terrible it is. We just compassionately listen and say, okay. And then they'll go off and play. And so the ego is much the same way. If we just listen to it and let it do its thing, and that's it. So yeah, you bet. It's kind of, because trying to control the ego is like trying to stop a freight train. But we can get out of the way of the freight train. Just let it go by. We don't have to let it hit us.
Do we have? I think we have time maybe for one more if there's.
If there isn't one, I have one.
All right. This will be the toughest of all, I'm sure, yeah.
My opportunity. No. I had asked me as they were going out, they wanted to know, how did writing this book, how did it affect you? What did you learn? And then for me, are there any more books coming?
I think the book is still affecting me. I think that it was so interesting. I was having a difficult time this summer, and my daughter-in-law said something to me, and I says, wow, Pam, I says, that was just really profound. She says, yeah. She says, I got that out of your book. And so I think my life is living out that book in some ways. So absolutely, yeah, it still is. Is there another book? Probably. I was approached by some of the folks at Sounds True Publishing, and they were interested in the fact that I was a Christian minister and a Buddhist meditation teacher both for the last 25 years, and wanted me to write something that about a spiritual practice that includes both the Buddhist teachings and the teachings of Jesus. And so anyway, that may be the next book. We'll see.
Thank you.
You bet.
Well, we've been closing most of our weeks with formal practice, whatever the practice was
Okay.
we were studying.
Okay.
And just wondered, as we close today, if you would be willing to lead us in an awareness meditation.
I'd be happy to. So
you.
let's do that for about 5 minutes. And I invite you to become aware of your spine and to sit up as straight as possible if you're able. So the neck, head, and spine is in alignment. If possible, feet flat on the floor. So just sense the body sitting in the pew, in the chair. And bring awareness to the breath. Feel each in-breath, each out-breath. And just notice where you feel the breath in the body. Feel the sensations of the air moving through the nostrils. The chest, the belly rising and falling. Just notice the other sensations in the body. Pleasant feelings or unpleasant feelings or neutral feelings. Just be aware. Be aware of thoughts as they move through the mind. Notice how they come and they go. See if you can notice thoughts without getting entangled in them, without becoming identified with them. Just being aware of everything. There's nothing to do, no problems to solve. Just in this moment, everything is as it needs to be. Just this moment, just this breath. I invite you to become aware of hearing. And then I invite you to gently open your eyes to become aware of seeing. And to continue the practice of awareness with the eyes open. And I invite you to continue this practice throughout the day and for as long as you like. So we'll close by giving thanks to Spirit for this opportunity to experience the truth of who we really are. We say thank you, Spirit, and amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Brandon.
And, you know, just as Alan had mentioned, these are not practices that, you know, it's all right, fall faith's over, let's get on with Christmas, we're all self-aware now. These are practices that we now continue to live with, we continue to have as a part of our lives. So I'd like to invite all of you to join with me in continuing these practices of awareness and acceptance and forgiveness and opening our heart. So thank you all so very much. It's been a wonderful series, and I just thank you for joining us for it. I'll see you Friday night at the gala. God bless you.